This is Mr. Bit from Martians vs. Roughnecks, and this is another Blender introduction video. What we're going to go over this time is really using the Blender speaker, and you can use that for adding 3D sound into your Blender projects. But there's quite a few sometimes confusing settings. Well, it certainly confused me the first time I used it. So we're going to go over that today. Also, we're going to go over some basic keyframe animation. So what we're going to do is I'll just briefly walk you through this scene, what we've actually got. We're on the layout view at the moment. We've got this plane, which is just like a flat rectangle, if you like. If you look at it from this angle, it's just a flat rectangle, like a virtual ruler, if you like. And then I've marked out some measurements across here, because each one of these little squares you can see here is really, in the Blender world, in the Blender 3D world, they're 1 meter. So I've got a 0 meter at the start, and then 10 meters out, 25 meters out, 50 and 100. And those are just text objects themselves, and you add those in by doing a add text, and then it just adds a text object in. And if you want to edit that text object, I wasn't sure how to do this until earlier on today. You go up into, with that text object selected, you go up into edit mode, and then you kind of get a cursor. So, if that was 20 meters, it'd be 20, 25, and then back into object mode. And that underneath is just a pipe character that I thought made it look quite good. So let's just zoom back out so we can see everything again. Again, moving around in Blender, I did an early video on that for kind of navigating around and moving and zooming. So go and check that out if you haven't already, or if you're happy moving around in Blender, then you obviously don't need to see that. So under the outliner up here, you can see I've arranged the scene. I'll put everything in nice little collection boxes. So I've got the light over here, which I can obviously turn off and on to light the scene. I've got the camera, and I'll explain what I'm going to be doing with that. And then we've got the speaker object, and then I've got all of these all under a nice kind of 3D objects collection, so I can kind of hide that or show it if I want to. The reason I had the white background was really so we could see the speaker and the camera as it kind of moved around. So what we're going to end up with is we'll have some sound playing out the speaker, and then in Blender, what actually picks up that sound, the output from the speaker, is the camera. So we're going to animate this camera and send it up and down this ruler and see what the distance the camera, when the camera is moved away from the speaker, what impact that has on the sound based off what parameters we can put in the speaker. Okay, so to start with, if I press play, nothing happens, okay, because we've not got any sound in the speaker yet. So to add a speaker to a scene, even though we've already got it here, you would just go into add, the same as we did with the text, but you've got a speaker object down here. So I've got the speaker, and I've moved the speaker to 0 on my ruler and got it pointing down the ruler just by moving it and rotating it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the speaker and then come down to the speaker properties down here, which is just like a little musical note. It looks like it's got a couple of output lines coming out of it. So the first thing we need to do is to open an MP3 file. Now, whenever you're loading a music file or a sound file, you need to make sure that it's long enough for the animation you want to use it in. because within Blender, there might be some plugins available, but by default, when you play a sound, it will only play once. There's no repeat options or anything on here. It's just going to play from the start to finish, and that's it. And if you then play the animation again, it'll start, the sound again. So let's just open this quick export cheesy little loop that I set up earlier. So if we press on play now, hopefully we should get some output. Yep, there we go. So that's playing fine now. Set it back to frame 1. So at the moment, it's playing at full volume because the camera is sitting right above the speaker. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some of these settings that the speaker has got. And what we'll do is we'll go through how, when we change those, what impact it has. So by default, we've got the mute. If that's ticked, then nothing's going to play. If we press play, there's going to be no sound coming out. Okay. Volume is, you can't make that go higher than 1 in here, but you can set it. Now, this is just relevant to this particular sound. There is another setting later on, which is kind of the master sound volume for the whole of the scene. But this is just for this particular speaker. The pitch allows you to speed that sound up and slow it down. So if I set it to half, it's going to play back at high speed. Bit weird. If I set it to 2, it's going to play it at double speed. Yeah, bit weird. Okay, so let's set that back to 1. That will automatically, yeah, I'd normally set it on 1 anyway. So the next settings are in relation to the distance the speaker is, the camera is away from the speaker. So remember, the camera is the one that really picks up the sound. If you think the camera has got a right ear and a left ear, or a right microphone and a left microphone, then, and the distance they are away from the speaker is what we're talking about here. That's the distance. So the volume, and this isn't the volume at the minimum distance, this is the minimum volume you want the camera to actually be able to pick up. So at the moment, we've got this set to 0.05, so it doesn't matter how far away the camera is away from the speaker, we'll still be able to hear 0.05 of the sound of the volume. And the maximum volume, which means it doesn't matter how close, even if at the moment it's right on top, the camera is right on top of the speaker, it's just going to play it at 100%. If I drop this down to 0.5, it would just half the volume of the output. So generally, that's always at 1. Now, the attenuation is really how big are the chunks it will take to get from the maximum volume to the minimum volume. Now I do this at a step of 1, which means it's going to pretty much go down 1 meter every time, kind of 1% if you like, every meter it travels. So by the time it gets to the end, it's going to drop from the max volume down to the minimum. If this was 0, it would drop it down to 0 by the time it got here. But it's not, it's 0.05, so it'll drop it down to 0.05. Now, if this was set to 2, it would get down to that minimum by half the distance, and we'll test that later. If we set it to 4, it would cut it down to, it would have run out of volume. It would be down to the minimum volume by 25 meters. So there you go. So the maximum distance is really how it's going to calculate that drop off. So at the moment I've set it to 100. If I set it beyond the distance that it was traveling, it wouldn't get to that drop off. You know, if we're only going 100 meters, but the maximum distance is 200, it would only get to like 50% of the maximum drop off. So that's why we've got this set to 100. Now this distance reference, I'm going to set that back to 2. What this is how many meters away from the speaker does it start to drop off? Now, I normally set it to 2, so when it's 2 meters away, it's still at full volume. At 3 meters, it starts to decrease out to the out to the maximum distance, which is fairly realistic. If I set this at 50 meters, it would be maximum volume all the way until it hit 50, and then it would drop down to the minimum volume between 50 and 100. Okay, so that really covers those variables, and we'll come on to those later once we start moving the speaker. So next is the cone, which is really, if we had our camera moving left to right and it was kind of coming into the cone of sound between left and right, that's where this cone kind of comes in. Now, if you wanted the speaker to send sound a full 360 degrees, then you just set these both to 360. You can have a slightly lower volume at the outer cone. So imagine there's an inner cone on the middle. That would be kind of at full volume, and then you could drop the outer cone to like 50% volume. And as it moved in to the outer cone, it would get 50%, and then it would hit 100% as it hit the inner cone. So we're not really going to touch that today because it's not really relevant. Okay, so that covers the actual speaker object itself, but there's a couple of other areas where we need to set some sound settings. Okay, so the next one is in the scene properties here, which is like a little icon that looks like a cone and a couple of balls. I don't know what it is. Okay, so what we want to do is you will probably see it like this, and what you're looking for is the audio section to expand. Okay, so I mentioned earlier there was a scene master volume. So this is the master volume for any audio that's within this scene. Now here you can set this below 1, but you can also set it higher. So you could boost the volume if you wanted to. We could set this to 13.7. It'll be a bit louder. There we go. Let's set it back to 1. Okay. Any settings you do in here, you have to update the animation cache. So let's set that up and update the animation cache. Yeah, and then it's louder. Okay, so let's set that back to 1. In order for there to be any sound drop off at all, any calculation at all, you have to have a distance model selected here. If this was selected to none, then it doesn't matter all of those other settings that we covered on the other screen. It wouldn't make a difference. It would just play it at 100%, no matter where the camera was in relation to the speakers. You have to have a model set. So I tend to go with the linear clamped model. I haven't really played with the Doppler speed and factor. They're related to an emulation of the Doppler effect. So that's like if you were at a racetrack and you hear the sound of a speeding car coming towards you versus going away, or if someone was pressing their horn as they came towards you, as they were moving away, or an emergency vehicle with their siren blaring moving towards you versus going away. And that's because as sound is being emitted from a vehicle traveling towards you, the sound waves are actually being compressed by how fast they are traveling. And then as they hit your ear, basically, and versus when they're moving away from you, those sound waves are almost kind of being stretched out by the speed that they're traveling away from you. So these settings are really trying to emulate that, really. So this Doppler speed is normally set around 323, I think, and then the Doppler factor impacts how much Doppler effect there is made to that sound. I tend to just leave this on 0. But again, if you change anything in here, or you change the number of frames in your animation, always remember to come back in here. If the sound starts to get a bit weird, you probably got to come back in here and update that animation cache. Okay, so those are the two main settings for getting some sound working within Blender itself. But there's one final setting in relation to if you had some sound in your animation and you rendered it, unless you tell Blender to include that sound in your render output, it won't. Okay, so we'll cover that setting next. So we want to go into the output settings, which is this icon here that looks like a little printer printing out an image. And if we scroll down here to the output settings, and we've got the video output settings here. What we really want to do is the audio output. So I'm just selecting, by default, if you, I think it's normally, by default, it's normally set to no audio. So even if you had some audio settings and it was playing okay in Blender, then you rendered it and went to check your video and played it back and there was no audio in it, chances it's because of this setting here. So I tend to just stick on MP3 stereo with these defaults and you're fine. Again, you've got another audio setting, can't go over 1, but you can kind of knock that down a little bit if the balance is a bit off. Okay, so I think that covers all of the speaker settings. What we need to do now is actually animate this speaker and see what those settings are like for this speaker output. Okay, in order to do that, what we really want to do is go into our animation dope sheet here. Okay, so this is on the keying setting at the moment. What you can do is switch to animation view, which is just the default animation view here, because what that's showing is the camera that we've got placed and what it can see, and the animation keyframes. So what keying allows us to do is basically any object in Blender has pretty much got a location. Let me go here. So I'll select the camera from the view up here. We can see we've got the camera selected. And what I'm going to do is select this icon here, which is the object properties, which you will use a lot in Blender. Once you get your head round, it's that little orange box that will help you a lot. That will help you a lot, because I could never remember which icon had all of the settings in, because there's a lot of icons here. But yeah, this is the one that really relates to, we've got the location, we've got the rotation, and we've got the scale and lots of other kind of settings, but these are the key ones that we're looking at here. Okay, so what keying allows you to do is lock in any of these particular settings to a frame in the animation. So I'll explain that in a bit more detail. So what we want this animation to do, and I'll just move to the first frame in the animation, because really important of keyframing is making sure you're on the right frame. So I'll click on this icon here to take us to frame 1, and we can see there's this lighter shaded piece here from frame 1 to 200. That's because our start to end frame, start is 100, end is 200. What we want to do is start this camera at 0 on frame 1, then move it to 100 at halfway through the frame. So at frame 100, it should be at 100 meters. And then when it gets to the 200th frame, it should be back to the start again. So that's what we're going to do, and I'll show you how we're going to do it. So we've got the camera in the start position. Yep, tick. We've got the frames in the start frame. Yep. So those two, we've got the location correct and we've got the frame correct. What we need to do now is lock that position as a keyframe. And the easiest way to do it with this is, see just to the right of this property, the location X, there's a padlock for locking it, which we don't want to do. But then there's this dot here. So if I just left click on there, that's it. We've got a keyframe on location X for the camera in frame 1. And we can tell that that has been set because this is now changed to yellow, and we've got the animated property is enabled. And if we look over here at the dope sheet, we can see there's an animation under the camera. This is just a hierarchy here. Under camera action, we've got some object transforms. If we expand that, we can see we've got one on the X location there at frame 1. Now, if there were more than one of these properties that I'd set a keyframe on, say if I'd set one on Y, then we'd get another entry here. But I'm not changing Y, I'm only changing X. So it's best practice, only set a keyframe on something that you want to definitely be at that location or rotation at that frame. So we'll remove that keyframe just by clicking on that again. Now, the next thing we want to do is at frame 100, we want it to be at location 100. Now, it's just a coincidence that those two aligned. If I was going to do this to 300 frames, then I'd want it to be at location 100 in the middle of the frame, so it'd be at a position 150. So there's a couple of ways to move the current frame along. You can left click and drag it. That's one way to do it, which is pretty good. The other way is down here. You can click on the arrows either side to go up and down, or you can just manually type in there and then tab off. So we're at position 100, so we're on the right frame. What we need to do now is move the camera to the location we want it to be, frame 100. Now we can either do this by changing this location here. See, it's highlighted green because it knows there is somewhere in the animation there is a keyframe set on location X. So what I want to do is, now I know this is going to be minus 100 over here because we are to the left of the y-axis. If I was going to the right of the y-axis, it would be moving up. So I know this is minus 100. You could just kind of drag it down. We can see it kind of moving down now, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do minus 100 now, and that'll be in the correct location. So we're on the right frame, we're in the right location. Let's set that keyframe. So click, and we've got another keyframe set. Again, it's gone to yellow. We can see it here that we've got a keyframe set there. Now, once you've got kind of at least 2 keyframes, you're going to be able to see what Blender's going to do is going to fill in all of those gaps. It's going to interpolate those. Now, I won't go into the advanced settings of interpolation. I think this is just going to do what's called a linear interpolation. So if I move it down to position 80, you can see that's probably going to be at around minus 80, minus 89, because we started at slightly over there, and then it will come all the way down. So I move it down to frame 1, it's going to be in that starting position. So that's it. It's basically filled in all of those gaps. I didn't have to manually animate 100 frames. I did one, basically. I set 2 keyframes and it's filled in all of the gaps. So what we want to do next is we want at frame 200, we want it to go back to the starting position. Okay, so now I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. We could have set this as kind of a yo-yo kind of interpolation, so it would ping pong between the two. But what we want to do here is we want to set another position at 200. So again, what we could do is we could move to frame 200, then move the camera back to the position there and insert the keyframe again. That's one way you can do it. But we've already got a keyframe with the X location set. So what we can do is let's select that keyframe. It's selected because it's yellow. If I was on this keyframe, selected that keyframe, it would be highlighted yellow. So back to this keyframe here. And what we can do is key, and we can copy the keyframe or do a Control and C. You can duplicate it. If you duplicate though, it will just duplicate it in place and we'll have to manually move it. What we're going to do here is we're going to key, we're going to copy the keyframe, then we're going to move the current frame over to frame 200. And again, we can manually drag that, but I'm going to type it in here, move to 200, and then we can either Control V and paste that, or we can do key, paste keyframe. Okay, there we go. So I pasted the same keyframe. So now, if we move that up and down, we start off at 0, it's going to move up, it's filled in all the keyframes, going to 100, and then it's going to come back again, and it will keep looping, doing that. So, shall we see what it sounds like now? What I'm going to do is, because I've changed the frames, I'm just going to go back to that scene properties and update the animation cache, just in case. Then I'm going to come to the speaker and then select the object data properties, which is the little music note icon. So again, what we're going to do now is play it and see what it sounds like. So what I expect here is the sound will play and it will drop off from this 2 meters here, and it will go down to 0.05 of the volume at 100, and then it will increase on its way back. So let's go. Yep, that did pretty much what we thought, right? So I'm just going to set this back to the start again. Okay, and let's play with some of these. Let's play with some of these settings. Okay, so let's set the volume to fully 0. So what that'll do is when it gets to 100 or close to 100, well, when it gets to 100, there'll be no sound. Yep, that did as we expected, right? So let's set that to 0.05 because most of the time you'll probably want some sound. I'm not going to mess with the max because I would probably change that up here. Now the attenuation, this is one that we mentioned earlier, if you remember. I tend to set it to 1 so that it will, because we're going to 100 meters and there's 100 meters to get there, it will step off nicely. But if I set this to 2, you'll see that we kind of run out of volume to reduce to about the 50 meters mark because it's reducing it at twice the available distance. Okay, let's listen to that. Yep, so that was expected. If we do it to 4, it will probably run out at 25 meters. Oop, not 43. Okay, let's try that. Now again, we could still hear it because it's playing this volume minimum once it gets past its kind of maximum drop off. Okay, so the maximum distance, I won't play, if I set that to 50, it will get down to the minimum at kind of 50. So I'll leave that at 100. Now the next one that I'm going to play with is, well, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to 200. Okay, and it's basically its minimum volume would be somewhere over here, so it's only really going to reduce down to half of its volume. Oh, that's because we've still got attenuation at 4. Let me set that back to 1. Let's try that again. Yeah, see, it only got down to half volume because we've set the maximum distance at twice the distance that the speaker, that the camera is actually moving. So let's set that back to the length of our ruler. And this distance reference is the last one, because this is at what point does it start to drop off. So at the moment it's dropping off at 2. If I set this to 50, it will only start to reduce the volume once it goes past the 50 mark. Yeah, that was pretty clear, wasn't it? So even at 20, if we did it at 25, it just doesn't seem that realistic to me, I don't think. So yeah, I tend to keep that quite low. I think that covers everything that we needed to cover. So thanks very much for listening to this, and until the next time. Thanks.